Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the place you come to really plunge headfirst into these big, complex topics, pulling out the key insights you need to be genuinely well-informed. Today, we're navigating a really intense, often unseen world, the precise and impactful art of political line drawing. Okay, let's unpack this a bit. We're talking about a process that, on the surface might seem pretty technical, maybe even dry, but it profoundly shapes our democracy. It really determines who gets a voice and, frankly, whose concerns get pushed to the sidelines.
Absolutely. And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is how these seemingly bureaucratic processes, like redistricting, have such massive real-world impacts. It's all about who gets represented and whose voices actually get heard in the end. I mean, it's not just lines on a map. It's basically the blueprint for political power for the next 10 years.
Exactly.
And our focus today, our deep dive, is squarely on California. It's a state that, just given its sheer size and its political dynamics, is often seen as a bellwether for national trends.
Right. What happens there often doesn't stay there.
Precisely. So what unfolds within California's borders when it comes to redistricting? Well, it often resonates far beyond.
So our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. We want to unravel the intricate complexities of California's redistricting process, especially looking at it through a critical lens. Our main source for this exploration is an article titled California Redistricting: How Political Manipulation Threatens Representation and the Future of the Golden State. It's from the Town Hall News, written by Tom Wong, and it was published on August 5, 2025. And it lays out a very specific and, well, sometimes unsettling perspective on what's supposedly going on.
It certainly does. And as we dig into the arguments presented in this piece, the core questions really guiding our conversation today will be, how are these crucial district lines actually drawn in California, despite having this supposedly independent commission? What are the alleged manipulations at play, according to Wong's analysis? That's key. And maybe most critically, what does all this mean for the future of diverse political voices, particularly conservative ones, as the article highlights, not just within California, but potentially across the whole country, giving California's, well, outsized influence?
Yeah, that national angle is huge.
It is. So this deep dive should give you a unique, really in-depth perspective on these vital questions.
Now, you might be sitting there thinking, redistricting? Really? How does that impact my life? Sounds like insider baseball, something for political junkies. But honestly, this isn't some abstract game played by politicians far away. Understanding these dynamics actually gives you a crucial shortcut. It helps you be well-informed about the very mechanics of your own representation. It directly impacts the policies affecting your community, the quality of your representation, and, frankly, the overall health of our democratic process, even if those connections feel a bit distant at first.
That's exactly right.
Every single line drawn on that map ultimately decides who gets to speak for you and, how loudly or maybe how softly your voice gets heard in the halls of power.
Precisely. And just to build on that, getting a handle on these dynamics gives you really crucial insight into the mechanics of power and representation. The stuff that underpins our whole system. It empowers you, the listener, to be a more informed, more critical citizen, someone who can spot not just when the democratic process is working as intended, but also, as our source suggests, when it might be experiencing, let's say, significant vulnerabilities, or when it might be subtly getting nudged away from its theoretical, equitable purpose.
Right.
That understanding is just foundational for civic engagement.
Okay, so the stakes are clearly high. Let's peel back the layers then and get a grip on the foundational mechanics of this decennial ritual. What exactly is redistricting, and why is it so fundamentally important? Well, basically, every 10 years, right after the U.S. Census counts everyone in the country, states have this huge task: redrawing legislative and congressional districts. The fundamental purpose, at least in theory, is to reflect population changes, to make sure every citizen has equal representation.
The one person, one vote idea.
Exactly. It's about maintaining that principle in a population that's always shifting, always dynamic, making sure no district gets so big that individual votes are diluted or shrinks so small that its votes suddenly carry, disproportionate weight.
And while that theoretical goal, equal representation, is obviously noble and absolutely vital, the reality, as Tom Wong's article really emphasizes, is that in practice, this process, well, it has often devolved into a partisan tug-of-war.
Not just a technical exercise, then.
Far from it. It's rarely just about adjusting lines based on population numbers. Instead, it becomes this intense strategic game where political influence is, let's say, heavily exerted. Think about it.
Hmm.
The inherent nature of redrawing lines that determine who holds political power for a whole decade. That makes this process incredibly susceptible to partisan manipulation. Regardless of the stated intentions for fairness, it basically becomes a high-stakes chess match. Control of legislatures, even Congress, hangs in the balance.
Okay, so with that backdrop, let's pivot to California's really unique, almost experimental approach here. The California Citizens Redistricting Commission. This was established, over a decade ago, through a voter-approved initiative.
That's right.
And it was a direct response to these long-standing worries about partisan gerrymandering. The idea was to take the map drawing power away from the politicians themselves and put it in supposedly independent hands. It's a 14-member body, specifically designed, I believe, with 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 4 members who aren't affiliated with either major party.
Correct. The no party preference or minor party members.
Right. And they're chosen through this pretty complex multi-stage application process that's designed to find genuinely independent citizens. The theoretical goal was crystal clear: impartiality, fairness, and a process that's beyond overt political influence.
That was absolutely the theory. And, for many people, it really did represent a significant step towards fairer maps, maybe a more representative democracy. However, Wam's article, the one we're focusing on, immediately throws some cold water on that ideal. It presents a pretty sobering counter-narrative.
Okay, how so?
Well, the piece argues that despite this independent design, the commission remains, and I'm quoting here, vulnerable to manipulation by political insiders and activist groups, unquote. And crucially, the article specifies that this alleged manipulation often happens at the expense of specific communities. And it explicitly calls out conservative and rural communities as being particularly impacted.
So how does that manipulation supposedly work if the commissioners themselves are independent?
Well, the article digs into how this might happen. It suggests that even without direct ties to elected officials, well-resourced advocacy groups can strategically influence the public input phase. They might submit these incredibly detailed, meticulously crafted map proposals. On the surface, these maps might look neutral, they might meet all the official criteria, but the argument is they're subtly engineered to favor one political outcome.
So it's more indirect, like influence gerrymandering.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. It's not the direct politician-led gerrymandering the commission was designed to stop, but something more subtle. And it really raises a fundamental question, doesn't it? Can any process truly be apolitical when the stakes are this incredibly high?
Yeah.
When the outcome directly shapes the distribution of political power for a decade? This tension, between the commission's stated purpose and these criticisms from sources like Wong's article, that forms the absolute central debate in California's redistricting process right now.
Okay, so let's really zero in on what Tom Wong's article describes as the current battleground in California. It paints a picture of, nothing short of a power grab disguised as process. The source claims that California's Democratic supermajority has allegedly, quote, used its influence to tilt the scales in their favor in this current redistricting cycle. It's not just about winning the next election, it seems, but about really entrenching power for the long haul.
Yeah, the article portrays it as a very calculated strategy. Wong explains the alleged mechanism behind this. He states that progressive advocacy groups, with the tacit support of Democratic lawmakers, have pushed for new district maps that carve up Republican strongholds, dilute conservative voting blocs, and all but guarantee continued Democratic dominance in Sacramento and Washington.
Wow. So the implication isn't just that demographics are shifting, but that there's an active, coordinated effort here.
That's precisely the argument presented. An active effort to consolidate power. The article suggests that when you have such a unified, well-resourced effort on one side, the outcomes for the opposing side can start to feel almost predetermined. And that leads to a significant, maybe even lasting, imbalance of political power and representation. And remember, a supermajority in California means they have enough votes to pass pretty much anything without any Republican support. They can even override a governor's veto. That's immense power.
Huge power. And the article gets specific, right? It talks about a particular gerrymandering technique called cracking. Can you explain that?
Yes, cracking is one of the classic gerrymandering tools. The article explains it as intentionally diluting the voting power of a strong, concentrated voting bloc, in this case. The source alleges conservative voters by splitting them up across multiple districts.
So instead of letting them win one district, you spread them out so they lose everywhere.
Essentially, yes. The goal isn't to pack your opponent's voters into one district to concede that seat. That's packing. Cracking is about spreading them so thinly across many districts that they become an ineffective minority in any single one. It ensures that no single district has enough of that group's votes to actually swing an election their way.
And does the article give examples of where this is supposedly happening?
It does. It points specifically to districts in Central Valley, portions of Orange County, and parts of the Inland Empire, historically Republican areas. The article claims these areas are being redrawn in ways that lump conservative voters with heavily progressive urban populations.
Can you paint a picture of what that lumping looks like?
Sure. Imagine, say, a fairly concentrated block of conservative voters in a rural or suburban area. Maybe they share certain economic interests or cultural values. Instead of keeping that community largely together in one district where they might have a good chance of electing their preferred candidate, the new lines, according to the source's allegation, might take chunks of that block and attach each chunk to a different, much larger, heavily urban and progressive district nearby. So those conservative voters get effectively swamped. Their collective voting power becomes almost negligible in any single one of those new districts.
And the result, according to Wong.
The result, as described by Tom Wong, is that it all but ensures that conservative candidates will face insurmountable odds in future elections. The strategic intent, according to the source, is clearly framed as an attempt to neutralize a significant portion of the conservative vote, making it nearly impossible for their candidates to win, even in areas that might have traditionally leaned their way or been competitive. It's presented as an alleged move to prevent genuinely competitive elections from even taking place in these regions, shifting the balance of power pretty decisively.
Okay, so if we take these alleged manipulations described in the source at face value for a moment, what are the profound, tangible impacts beyond just who wins or loses seats? Let's think about representation and trust. What happens to the actual diversity of thought in the legislature if one side is, as alleged, systematically disadvantaged?
That's a really critical distinction the article makes. It argues this goes far beyond just partisan wins and losses. Tom Wong states that when districts are engineered to favor one party heavily, the result is a legislature that does not reflect the true diversity of thought in the state.
Meaning less debate, fewer perspectives.
Potentially, yes. What this implies is that genuine debate, the kind that often leads to more robust, well-vetted policy, might become a casualty. If crucial counterarguments or alternative solutions from a broader spectrum of viewpoints, including, as the source emphasizes, conservative ones, are simply not present or are significantly underrepresented in Sacramento, then the policies that get enacted might only serve a narrower ideological band.
And that could overlook the needs of whole segments of the population.
Exactly. It could potentially overlook the needs and concerns of millions of Californians who hold different viewpoints. Think about issues particularly important to rural communities, or maybe small business owners, or those with more fiscally conservative perspectives. Their issues might receive minimal attention or funding if their potential representatives are consistently outnumbered and their voices effectively suppressed by the district design itself. It leads to a less responsive, maybe less effective government overall.
And thinking beyond just policy outcomes. What about the voters themselves? The psychological impact, the civic impact? I mean, if you feel like your vote doesn't really count because the district lines seem drawn specifically to disadvantage your viewpoint, what does that do? Does it make you just want to check out?
The article is quite blunt on this point. It states that redistricting manipulation also erodes trust in the electoral process. Full stop. It argues that when voters see their communities split up or merged with distant urban centers, they often feel disconnected from their representatives and disengaged from civic life.
A sense of alienation, basically.
A profound sense of alienation, yes. And the article argues this undermines the very foundation of representative democracy.
Yeah.
That's a critical observation because if citizens lose faith that their vote has a meaningful impact or that their community's unique voice can genuinely be heard, it can absolutely lead to voter apathy, reduced civic participation, lower turnout, a general sense of disillusionment, and a gradual breakdown in that crucial social contract between the governed and their government.
And the perception of unfairness can be just as damaging as actual unfairness, right?
Absolutely. Perceived unfairness can be incredibly corrosive to maintaining a healthy, vibrant democratic system. It can create cynicism that's really, really difficult to reverse.
Okay, so this fight over the lines isn't just happening within California's borders, and it's clearly not just about drawing maps. There are these broader implications, legal battles, national influence. Tom Wong's article mentions that the GOP and various grassroots organizations are actively, quote, fighting back. They're filing lawsuits, challenging maps they see as blatantly partisan. So this isn't passive acceptance.
No, it's depicted as an active, organized resistance, both legally and politically. However, the article immediately highlights a significant hurdle these groups face. It states that with California's courts often aligned with the political status quo, it's an uphill battle.
So even the courts might not be a reliable check.
That's the perception presented by the source. It suggests that even the judicial avenues, which you'd normally think of as a crucial check on potential overreach by the legislature or the commission, well, they are perceived in this context as less likely to provide a complete remedy. The difficulty of overturning these established political mechanisms through the courts, especially when the judiciary itself is seen by the source as generally aligned with the prevailing political forces. It means those challenging the maps face a really deeply entrenched system.
So the legal fight is tough, even if they feel they have a strong case.
Exactly. The article implies that the path to reform through the courts, while they're pursuing it vigorously, is just fraught with significant obstacles. It often requires not just solid legal arguments, but also navigating a pretty complex political landscape, even within the judicial system itself.
And this brings us back to the national implications, which you mentioned earlier. This is where it gets really interesting for people outside California, too. How does the source connect these specific state-level district lines in California to the bigger picture in Washington, D.C.? Why does this process carry such immense national weight?
Yeah, this is a crucial point the article emphasizes. It states, as the nation's most populous state, California's congressional delegation wields significant power in Washington. I mean, with 52 representatives currently, California's delegation is by far the largest. That gives them immense collective clout to sway national policy, to shape the legislative agenda.
52 seats, that's huge.
It's enormous. And Wong's article then directly connects this clout to the alleged redistricting strategy back home. It states that by crafting districts to ensure Democratic victories, progressives are effectively shaping national policy and diminishing the influence of conservative voters across the country.
So it's not just about California politics anymore.
According to the source, not at all. It's framed as a strategic move that contributes directly to the broader national political landscape. Think about it. A larger, more unified Democratic delegation coming from California, potentially secured through alleged partisan map drawing, that can significantly tilt the balance of power in the U.S. House of Representatives. It can impact the passage or failure of major federal legislation, things like the economy, environmental policy, social issues, you name it. And as the source argues, it ultimately diminishes the overall influence of the conservative movement at a national level. It's really a vivid illustration of how these seemingly local political processes can have truly macro-level consequences affecting the direction of the entire country.
Okay, so let's try to deconstruct this idea of fair redistricting then, because Tom Wong's analysis really suggests there's a significant gap between the theory, the myth maybe, and the reality here. Proponents of the current California process, especially the Citizens Commission, often claim it is independent and fair. They emphasize its apolitical nature.
Right, that's the official story, the promise of the reform. But the article directly counters that claim. It states flatly, but the reality is that the commission is influenced by political activists, often with little representation from conservative voices.
So it fundamentally challenges that idea of neutrality.
It does. The analysis in the Town Hall News suggests that while the commission itself might be legally independent on paper, these well-organized activist groups can strategically influence the process, particularly through those concerted public input campaigns we talked about, submitting those highly detailed map proposals that look okay on the surface, meet the criteria, but are subtly engineered.
That influenced gerrymandering again.
Exactly. Where the design of the independent commission is sort of sidestepped through these indirect means. And the implications are pretty significant. If the very body that's supposed to be drawing fair maps is perceived by critics like Wong as being influenced by specific partisan agendas, well, then the integrity of the whole process gets called into question. And it could lead, the article argues, to predictably partisan outcomes despite the stated goal of independence. It just highlights how difficult it is to create a truly apolitical process in what is, let's face it, an inherently political landscape.
Right. And what about that public input piece? In any genuinely democratic process, you'd hope citizen participation would be central. Is public input actually considered in California's redistricting, according to the source, or is it sometimes just window dressing, a box to be checked?
Well, the source puts it quite starkly. Public input is often ignored or tokenized, with decisions made behind closed doors. That's a strong accusation, and it directly undermines those principles of transparency and real democratic engagement.
Tokenized, meaning they listen but don't actually act on it.
That's the implication. That hearings are held, comments are submitted, but the actual weight given to those inputs, especially, the article suggests, from dissenting voices or conservative communities, might be minimal. The alleged result, according to the article, is a process that claims neutrality while delivering predictably partisan outcomes.
Mhm.
And the challenge here is really complex, isn't it? How do you ensure genuine public engagement happens? How do you make sure citizens' voices are not just heard, but actively considered in such a technical, high-stakes process?
Mm.
And how do you ensure the final decisions are transparently linked back to that public feedback rather than seeming like they came out of nowhere or from hidden agendas?
Yeah, when decisions feel like they're made behind closed doors, especially on something this vital.
It naturally breeds distrust. It reinforces the perception, fair or not, that the process is designed to serve specific partisan interests rather than the broader public good.
So, with all these alleged manipulations and the criticisms being leveled by the source against the current process, it's clear conservatives aren't just sitting back. The source details a pretty active and organized response. It sounds like a full-fledged fight for accountability for a more balanced system.
That's definitely the picture painted. The article describes these concerted efforts. Grassroots organizations, legal advocacy groups, and Republican lawmakers are working tirelessly to shine a light on the flaws of the current system.
Mm.
So it's not just one group, it's a multifaceted approach trying to challenge the status quo.
Using lawsuits, public awareness.
Exactly. They're using the legal channels we discussed, but also running public awareness campaigns to try and educate citizens, to pressure decision makers. They're engaging with the media, organizing community events, all to highlight what they perceive as unfair practices in the redistricting process. It shows a real determination to fight for what they see as fair representation, rather than just accepting maps they view as rigged against them.
It sounds like they're in it for the long haul.
The source presents their actions as being aimed squarely at pushing back against what they view as an engineered political environment. They're advocating for a return to principles of fairness and, importantly, genuine competition. It seems like a long-term strategy, built on the belief that sustained pressure might eventually lead to reform.
And let's clarify that point about competition. It's really crucial to understand the core argument the conservative movement is making here, as articulated in this source. What are they actually advocating for? Is it just, hey, draw the lines to help us win, or is there a bigger principle involved?
The article makes a very important distinction on this. It explicitly states, the conservative argument is not for gerrymandering in their favor, but for genuinely competitive districts that allow voters to choose their representatives, not the other way around.
Okay, that's a key difference. Voters choosing representatives, not representatives choosing voters.
Precisely. It reframes the whole debate. It's presented not as a push for mere partisan advantage, but as advocating for a fundamental democratic principle. They argue, according to the source, that fair redistricting is essential for balanced debate, policy innovation, and effective government. What this means is they're pushing for a system where elections are genuinely contestable, where candidates actually have to appeal to a broader range of voters to win, where the outcome isn't effectively decided simply by how the district lines are drawn.
So, in a competitive district, candidates can't just rely on their party base.
Right. They can't take victory for granted. They have to work to earn votes from across the political spectrum, which ideally fosters more compromise, more responsiveness to a wider array of concerns. It's presented as a demand for actual choice and accountability from elected officials. And the argument is that this kind of competition fosters a healthier political environment for everyone, not just for one party. They contend competitive elections actually drive better policy and create a more engaged electorate.
Okay, so let's bring this towards the implications, the immense stakes for California's future. The article paints a pretty stark picture, doesn't it? What are the long-term consequences if these alleged manipulations, as described by Wong, actually succeed? What does this mean for California's political landscape over the next decade?
The warning from Tom Wong's article is quite grave. It says, if progressives succeed in their efforts, conservative Californians will face even greater marginalization, and the state's political monoculture will become even more entrenched.
A political monoculture. What does that really mean in practice?
Well, it suggests a future where one single dominant political ideology becomes overwhelmingly prevalent across the state's power structures. This could potentially lead to a significant lack of diverse ideas, a real lack of genuine debate on critical issues facing California. Think about it. A political monoculture, as the article terms it, could mean that solutions to California's really complex challenges, housing, water, The economy, you name it, are primarily viewed through just one ideological lens.
Essentially missing other valid approaches or concerns?
Potentially, yes. It might overlook innovative approaches coming from different perspectives or neglect the specific needs of significant segments of the population who hold different viewpoints. Again, think rural communities, small business owners, people with more fiscally conservative ideas. It fundamentally impacts the breadth of ideas that even get considered and whether the full spectrum of the state's incredibly diverse populace truly sees itself reflected in its government.
And it's so vital to reiterate, as the article does, that this isn't just presented as a problem for Republicans. The source really hammers this point home. So, what does this all mean for you, the listener, regardless of your own political leanings? What's the bigger takeaway here?
Yeah, the source concludes this section with a really powerful statement, one that tries to resonate far beyond just partisan lines. It says, this is not just a problem for Republicans, it's a problem for anyone who values democracy, debate, and genuine representation.
That's a strong claim.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, the perspective argued here is that when competitive districts are eroded, when diverse voices are systematically stifled, regardless of which voices they are, the very quality of governance declines for everyone. Without that robust debate, without the need for politicians to appeal to a broader electorate, which competitive districts naturally encourage, there's less incentive for compromise. There's potentially less accountability to the public and maybe less effective policymaking overall. It can lead to a government that feels less responsive, one that perhaps serves only a vocal segment of the population. And ultimately, the argument goes, it harms the health of the entire democratic system, making it less representative of all the people it's supposed to serve. It's really a compelling call to look beyond just the party battles and focus on the foundational principles of a functioning, healthy democracy. Because when those principles get compromised, everyone ultimately pays a price.
Okay, so given all these challenges, these high stakes identified in the source, what does it suggest needs to change? What's the path forward? What reforms does Tom Wong in the Town Hall News propose to try and ensure genuinely fair representation for all Californians? First, it seems to target the commission itself.
Yes, the article explicitly calls to ensure the Redistricting Commission includes equal representation from all political viewpoints and genuine independence from activist groups. So this directly tackles that critique we discussed, that the commission, despite its independent design on paper, is currently perceived by the source as biased or susceptible to undue influence.
But how easy is that to achieve? True political balance.
Well, that's the huge challenge, isn't it? How do you actually achieve true political balance within a body like this?
Yeah.
Given how hard it is to select members who are genuinely free from all political leanings or external pressures, or who can effectively resist sophisticated influence campaigns, it's really asking for a much higher standard of impartiality, not just in the commission's structure, but in its day-to-day operation and the actual mindset and composition of its members.
Okay, second proposal from the source. Stronger transparency mandates. Bringing the whole process out into the light seems key.
Absolutely. Transparency is a major theme. The article demands open hearings, clear criteria, and real-time publication of all draft maps. And the reasoning behind this is pretty straightforward. More transparency could potentially counteract those perceived hidden agendas or backroom deals. If every single step of the process, the specific criteria used, the rationale behind decisions, all the proposed maps, if all that is immediately and clearly available for public scrutiny, it becomes much harder for any group, whether it's political insiders or activist organizations, to exert undue influence without facing immediate public and maybe legal challenge. The goal is to make the entire process auditable, accountable, to foster greater public trust, and just make it harder for alleged manipulations to happen unnoticed.
Makes sense. Third, the source highlights protecting communities of interest, drawing lines that actually make sense for the communities on the ground.
Indeed. The demand here is to draw districts that respect natural communities rather than splitting them for political advantage. This gets right at the heart of how techniques like cracking, which the source alleges happening, can fragment communities and dilute their collective voice.
Can you give an example of splitting a community of interest?
Sure, think of maybe a cohesive agricultural community in the Central Valley. They might share specific economic concerns, water rights issues, cultural ties. If that community gets arbitrarily split across 3 different congressional districts, maybe lumped in with urban areas with very different priorities, it becomes much harder for them to effectively advocate for their shared concerns. Their voting power is diluted, their specific needs might get overlooked. Now, defining and respecting communities of interest in a state as vast and diverse as California is practically very complex. People might disagree on what constitutes their community, but the intent behind this reform proposal is clear. Prevent the deliberate carving up of groups of voters who share common socioeconomic, cultural, or political interests just for partisan gain. Ensure they can collectively advocate for their concerns through their elected representatives, fostering a stronger sense of shared representation.
Okay, and finally, the source points to the courts. Strengthen judicial oversight as a crucial piece of the puzzle.
That's right. The article calls to strengthen the ability of courts to review and overturn blatantly partisan maps. This suggests the judicial system needs to act as a more robust, more independent check on potential overreach by either the legislature, in states where they draw lines, or the commission, as in California. If the courts are perceived, as Tom Wong's analysis suggested earlier, as perhaps too aligned with the existing political status quo, then strengthening their oversight capability becomes absolutely essential for reform. The idea is to empower the judiciary to serve as a truly impartial arbiter, making sure district lines genuinely uphold principles of fair representation and constitutional requirements, rather than just reflecting raw political power plays. It's presented as a vital layer of accountability that the source argues might be currently lacking or weakened, and one that could provide a crucial path for redress when the political process itself seems to have failed.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into California's redistricting saga, it's just abundantly clear, isn't it? The battle over these lines is so much more than just some bureaucratic exercise. It really is a microcosm of these broader fundamental debates about fair representation, political power, and, the very future of democracy itself. The analysis we've explored from the town hall news certainly suggests that the future of California's political landscape and potentially its significant national influence truly hinges on how these lines are ultimately drawn, and maybe just as importantly, whether that process is perceived by everyone as being fair and unbiased.
Absolutely. And that really leaves us with a final, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over. If the ability to choose your representative, not the other way around, is truly foundational to democracy, what then is the long-term cost to civic participation, to trust in the system, when large numbers of voters perceive that their choices are essentially predetermined? Predetermined by the way the lines are drawn, not by the strength of ideas or the quality of the candidates themselves. What does it actually take in practice to restore that sense of agency, that sense of empowerment for every single voter, to ensure their voice isn't just nominally heard, but genuinely matters in a system that can sometimes feel vast and maybe beyond their control? That's something to consider long after we finished our deep dive for today.